Today we're going to be breaking down the Wyoming Stablecoin initiative and what that might mean to crypto, but bigger, what it could mean to stablecoins here in the United States. So it's going to be a good one. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back into Tech Path. I do want to thank our sponsor today, and that is Tangem. Tangem is a great place for you guys to get started on self-custody. And the cool thing about Tangem, it's very easy to set up. And you can do this on Get Your Secure hardware wallet in place and operational. It's a little card that works with your phone, whether you have an Android or an Apple phone, doesn't matter. And it's very easy to set up, very slick in terms of, I think a lot of people, when they first get into setting up a wallet like this, they always think it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. This is 3 minutes, literally 3 minutes to get this rolling. So check it out. Use our code down below. It's going to give you guys a little bit of a discount to get started and get rolling here. I want to bring in our guest today. And of course, you guys have seen, and we've had quite a bit on the topic of the Wyoming stablecoin here on the show. And Anthony Apollo has been one of the guys that's leading the charge over there in Wyoming, so we want to welcome him into the show. Anthony, how are you?
Thanks for having me, Paul. Excellent. Thanks for having me, Paul.
Yeah, it's going to be good. I think we'll get a chance to really kind of dive into what you guys are doing. And, you know, we talked a little bit about this before the show. This is important because we think that it's likely that other states are going to follow in your footsteps in terms of how you guys have been able to get rolling. And I want to talk about a few things to get started here. On the original deadline and budget, can you give us a framework of what that was, just so to catch people up?
Absolutely. So when the Wyoming Stable Token Act was passed in early 2023, there was a $500,000 budget attached to the program, and there was also call it a soft deadline, in which the commission had to endeavor to launch the initial Wyoming Stable Token by December 31st of 2023. So it would have been about 9 months after the statute and the act was passed in the first place. I didn't come on into the executive director role until September of 2023. So that would have given me a very short amount of time to actually get that deployed. And that created a couple of different pathways. One was coming out of the startup world and not being someone who's in state government, I pretty quickly put some paths down in front where we could do things like proof of concepts, or even at one point suggested a hackathon to see which network we could launch on. Again, noting the expediency that would be required to meet such a date. But that was not a direction that we chose to go in. But when I put all that forward and started, putting in front of the legislators that oversee the program, the depth that we need to go into to do a compliant product, they said, well, you're certainly endeavoring. Look at all the work that's happened in a few scant months. So get it out when you can. Make sure it's compliance first, and we've certainly, stood by that. And of course, that was also when we got the mandate to be a multi-chain offering in due time. So that, I think, manifested the way it needed to manifest. When I came on board and did my interview process with the state, I did say it would take about 12 to 18 months to get this thing out the door in an appropriate fashion. And we're heading into that 18-month window right now. So I think we're about on the timeline I put forth.
How far away would that be then for a mainnet launch, do you feel right now?
Right. So we've been talking about a Q1, Q2 launch. I think for where we are right now in our vendor selection process, and we've, I think you've been, sharing with your audience some of the work we've been doing and who those vendors are. I think we're going to get through 22 hour-plus long vendor interviews between last Tuesday and this Tuesday with a whole series of evaluation committees attached to them. So the goal would be to fairly expeditiously make a selection for who those vendors are going to be on Thursday at our monthly meeting, segue into contracting, and then look to get a test token out on a test net, hopefully before the end of Q1, right before the end of March. I mean, we have, as you've highlighted in your show before, we have a priority to work with firms, companies, chains that have existing and demonstrable technology. And because of that mandate, we are working with, or looking to work with, vendors who have solutions that are fairly turnkey, and we intend to deploy those in that fashion. So getting a test token out to draw that line to say and say, hey, we're moving forward on this, should not be too difficult. Across Q2, that's where we'll do stress testing, make sure we have the structure in place to have a fully reserved token, put together and promulgate several series of rules that will govern how the token works and give end users a ton of transparency that they may not have with current issuers, and really look to get a fully reserved fiat-backed stable token out the door from a public entity in the United States, hopefully on July 4th.
Okay, wow, that would be a great day to do it. And I think, the speed to market is going to be the key thing, and we'll talk about that in a second. When you look at a successful launch year for a Wyoming stablecoin, what would that look like? At the end of the year, what do you guys feel would be a great scenario to go back to your legislature and say, we did it?
If we're talking by the end of 2025, there are a few things I would put out there. One is, of course, being multi-chain and meeting that requirement. Having sufficient liquidity to make this program self-sustaining, I think is an important one too. One thing to note about our program that I don't think is well appreciated is the taxpayer funding that has gone to get this off the ground, and that is a total of $5.8 million we have to do this, is functionally due back to the state. Once we start generating interest on the underlying reserves of the stable token, which would be functionally treasuries, pretty vanilla in that capacity, we intend to pay back that $5.8 million for the state.
Wow.
We also have a statutory requirement to have a 102% reserve requirement for the stable token. So if there's 100 million Wyoming stable tokens in circulation, the expectation is we'll be able to build up to it, but then maintain a buffer, which puts us at $102 million of, again, cash, treasuries, repurchase agreements. Beyond that, there's a few other things that I would like to kind of throw out there as my opinion, rather so than speaking for the commission. I do believe we can work towards a domestic yield-bearing stable token. States do have certain exemptions from securities laws. And as we've seen a large number of those issuers go offshore to accommodate that use case, I think we should be striving to do the research, do the compliance checks internally, and see if we can accommodate that here in the US as a US issuer. And I think there is a pretty big global component to this as well. To be clear, Wyoming will be the beneficiary of this program, but it won't be the only user of a Wyoming stable token. This is a program that's intended to be not only in Wyoming, but domestic, international, and again, if we can get the regulatory regime up to snuff, we'll be on DeFi as well.
What is the framework of that? What does the reserve look like? Are you guys going to be going out and buying Bitcoin? Is it going to be looking at gold, securities? What's going to be the asset class for where that will play?
So for the first issuance we're going to have, it's going to be fairly vanilla. And again, this is defined in our statute. So when those dollars come in, we're allowed to keep some portion of them in cash to meet those redemptions, but the rest of it will be in US Treasury securities with 365 days or less to maturity, or US Treasury repurchase agreements, including reverse repos, with 30 days or less to maturity. So it's fairly vanilla in that capacity. Should there be interest expanding that remit, that would have to come from the legislature. I will echo some of the feedback we heard from the Joint Appropriations Committee earlier this year, which is there are new representatives on the House side who stated their interest in having a stable token that is backed by gold. And I would certainly, over time, think that we could fit that into the structure. It's, we need to get one out the door. We need to do it right. We need to be successful. But over time, this is a state that is rich with land and livestock, gold and silver, rare earths. We are the #1 state in uranium deposits. Creating, I wouldn't necessarily call them stable tokens, but having a RWA framework for tokenized assets, I think something, if we could run that through the state, would be another big first, and really create liquid and transparent markets for things that kind of look like commodities, but may not be quite meeting that standard of liquidity and transparency.
Well, it's interesting because I won't get too deep into this, but even the Trump administration has talked a little bit about trying to tokenize certain, I won't say minerals, but when you look at raw materials, and like you mentioned with gold, silver, uranium being some of the key raw materials that Wyoming has and produces, could be kind of interesting if you went the RWA route for sure. So I'm going to watch that one as it goes for sure. Let's go over to the selection process. This is the list of qualified vendors that you had for the interviews. These are, I'm assuming, oral interviews. Is that right? Is that how you guys are going to do it? Okay. So you've got a couple of the top ones there, Miston Labs, which is Sui, and then you also have Avalabs in here, obviously that being Avalanche. When you look at Avalanche and Sui, what are you expecting to hear from them in terms of their pitch that's different than what you know about what they're doing now?
Sure. So there's a bit of a limit on what I can say there, because these interviews are still ongoing, and again, the results of which will be made public at our meeting on this upcoming Thursday. But I think both chains have seen increased adoption over the course of the last year and change. And from my, again, personal perspective, I think both of those platforms are doing great work when it comes to privacy. That is a very important component for the offering here in Wyoming. Again, to the point where we now, during our current and ongoing legislative session, have a bill on the floor that would prohibit the collection of certain types of information by the state. That's how much we care about privacy. This is something where, there's new features that are rolled out that are ZK based or homomorphic encryption based that I think could really bolster the offering from the get-go that we want to get into the hands of users. Now, again, that is not a definitive statement on which chain we're selecting. We do have 9 candidate chains, and there are other vendors that are going through the oral interview process that can be multi-chain or on those chains that you just mentioned. So we do have some flexibility there, but I do think those 2 in particular do have a privacy component that's quite strong.
Well, the privacy component is going to be one of the key things for any stablecoin, I think, as we go forward. You look at the list right now as looking at your blockchain selection scoring card, which is a really great spreadsheet you guys have compiled here for all of these different chains, is whether it's Solana, Avalanche, Sui, Polygon's there, Ethereum, etc. But a lot has been changed. You had TVL on base has exploded. We've seen Sui outages. Avalanche 9000, of course, has been moving in a direction now where they have made it a lot cheaper to be able to get into the potential of launching your own blockchain. Then you, of course, have even the Trump token itself exploded the meme category of Solana. So with all of that, and that's all happened since you started really going into the stablecoin discussion, has that swayed your opinion on the direction for you guys to take?
So it hasn't swayed direction on where we are right now. Those 9 candidate blockchains are still our candidate blockchains. At this point, all of the scoring is going to be vendor focused, not necessarily chain focused. But what I will say is we did have a explosion of interest in the program once those results were made public in November. And as you mentioned, there's significant development across many other chains besides the ones that we've listed. So to take one step back, one of the things we talked about in our prior meeting earlier this month was both rolling qualifications and also updating our blockchain selection exercise. To reiterate, as a public entity, we have to put everything we do into the public forum. Rules need to be promulgated. Decisions need to be in a public forum as well. So one of the things we did as we've updated our procurement rules is we've created a carve-out for rolling qualifications that would allow the commission to approve a set of standards that if any chain is determined to surpass those, meet or surpass those, they could be a candidate blockchain for us in the future, or it could be a candidate vendor for us in the future as well. So those will be 2 different frameworks. Again, we're talking about open source technology versus a company that can respond to an RFQ or an RFP. So 2 different things there. That is kind of step 1. And step 2 is because of all this activity that you've just alluded to, we do expect to have the blockchain selection exercise refreshed in the coming month. I do believe we're going to strive for those criteria or updated criteria to be put in front of the commission this upcoming Thursday, and then spend the rest of it'll be 1 day in February and then however many weeks we have in March until the next commission meeting, doing an assessment of those chains, probably focused on the ones that didn't make the cut the first time around because we've already qualified them. Then again, to your point, there are perhaps material findings with some of them that could move them in any direction. But I think, when we talk about the Cardano ability to do freeze and seize, Dfinity, we found they didn't have on-chain analytics at the time that we assessed it. Now they do. There's certainly some Bitcoin layer 2s that I think would make the cut this time around. Again, these are personal opinions, but as we put that data together, I would see several, I do believe several other chains will come into scope to eventually and hopefully be chains that have a Wyoming Stable Token on it.
Yeah, so interoperability is going to be key there. You look at that and you consider the growth of what we've seen with LayerZero. I'm looking at Flipside data right now just on transactions. LayerZero growing somewhat, but if you look at something like an Axelar right here, also same kind of scenario, very heavy growth within this. What's the most important feature that you're watching and looking for right now in terms of when you look at interoperability? Security.
In the past, there have been instances where bridges have been kind of the key vulnerability for tokens moving around on chain. And if that's something that happens to us as a state, that's going to cause magnified issues over how it happens in the private sector or with meme coins. So, when we talk about CCIPs or CCTPs or bridging, while CCIPs make it easier to be multi-chain, from my perspective, that's not a one-stop shop. There needs to be fairly robust testing across the chains that you'd go to from one to the other. And I think you also have to talk about the methodology by which you are leveraging those chains, right? Are you doing a burn and reissue? Are you doing wrapping? There's different models here, and we need to make that a very clear determination by the commission of the best path forward for that. And again, just stress test the hell out of everything before we ever push something public.
Has your legislature had any discussions with you since the ByBit situation occurred? Because I would assume that that's a concern now that's kind of thrown out into the public of almost anybody that's looking at moving into the blockchain. So any statements on that?
Not at the moment. I will say that was fairly recent. I think you and I work at blockchain speed. The state government here has an ongoing legislative session with, I think, about 600 bills on the floor. So I don't know if they're quite looking at ByBit in real time, but we certainly are here. And that will be, whenever those emails, I think that's more of a when than an if. When those emails come through, we'll be ready for them.
Let's go over to a clip here, because this is something that goes into one of the effects of how stablecoins could lower fees around retail sales. And this is a clip from you talking about POS transactions. Let's go to that.
And in a retail context, I can go down to my local coffee shop, use Wyoming Stable Tokens to buy a cup of coffee, and really avoid some of those transaction fees that are imposed using the more traditional payment rails that we have now. Instead of something like a credit card system where retailers are getting a 4 to 5% hit on the transaction cost.
My question is where and how would savings be constructed under the Wyoming stablecoin?
Sure. So in my ideal world, when I go down to that coffee shop, we could do something that's wallet to wallet, right? We flash QR codes at each other and we just make a transaction that way. Mine from my personal wallet, yours perhaps from a wallet that's attached to the coffee shop, the bar downtown, what have you.
Okay.
But I do think there is a lot of interest in some of these cards that kind of have the format of debit cards that can be backed, have stable tokens put on them and transact with those. And of course, integration with some of the existing payment systems. As you know, Stripe just purchased Bridge. So when you look at those types of integrations, it's not clear at this point in time how long it would take to really get penetration into the market and for those to be integrated into every POS system in the US or beyond. But I think there's many steps in the right direction. And I think, times can be hard for many merchants. So 4 to 5%, even 3% hit can be make or break for some of them. And if there's technology that we can be loud about, it may be a little bit more difficult to use. You may have to download your own wallet. You may need to self-custody your keys, or maybe sign up with a custodian, what have you. But at the end of the day, if we can have lower fees in the system, I think that once the word gets out and people start using it, the adoption will take off. And you've pointed to many other growth metrics during this conversation. I think we're seeing some of these hockey sticks take off, and hopefully that can be one of them.
Well, I think this will be a big win because it will energize the retail community. So anytime you can start to save money at that transaction point, you're going to immediately get pickup by restaurant hospitality, other retailers, even to a certain level on the e-commerce side. With all of that. So there's a good possibility that I think you guys might be onto something there. The thing that we have found is that it's still, as we watch more and more solutions kind of come to market, we'll watch this. We've been looking at Xeno Finance. This is another one that is being built by some fintech guys out of the UK. This one might be kind of interesting, but there's many that we think could be coming in this direction. This one, of course, riding on RLUSD, another stablecoin. This one be by Ripple. So it looks like we could see some speed to market coming. So it will be interesting to see how you guys come to market. So that could open up a lot more products for you as well, in terms of inside the state, but possibly outside the state.
Absolutely. And that's why for us, focusing on existing and demonstrable technology and vendors with those capabilities has been so critical, because even though we've seen this proliferation of stable tokens, we do intend to be the first state out. There is a potentiality here that we get to market faster than legislation comes out in DC. So we're going to continue keeping the pace up.
The marketing of, how you're going to get it out into the community. And you look at the market as we see it, typically we look at communities in crypto. One of the biggest communities out there, ironically, is on the KET meme coin, which is a Wyoming-based meme coin. So I'm thinking, well, maybe there's something here that could start to expand on that community alone. What are your thoughts on how you guys are going to go to market there?
So I can't say that I've spoken with any members of the KET community, though I've certainly seen the tweets. I do think a large part of the marketing strategy will be downstream of which blockchain we end up on. And again, that's still a determination that is going to be vendor focused. Should we end up with a vendor who can be multi-chain, that could be, a revisit to that discussion. But again, just looking at what's out there and not making any particular statement on it, right? We've seen an explosion of gaming use cases on Avalanche, meme coins on Solana. Ethereum still seems to be the place for tokenized securities and other more fortified instruments. So there's going to be differences, perhaps with that strategy and where we target based on which chain we launch on. But a couple other things to quickly add about that. I do think from a marketing perspective, there are a number of things I'd like to just highlight. One is we do expect this to be a pretty good blend of both transparency and privacy that may not be at offer with other issuers. I know those things sound paradoxical in the context of stable tokens, but from the transparency side, that's on us. We have to be extremely transparent with the rules that we promulgate, and rules do have the force of law in the state. The legislature makes the law. The agency is allowed to make its rules. Again, we do expect to have rules about reserves management. So how we're backing the token. Again, some of that is from statute, but how we handle those dollars, the waterfall that cascades from when those dollars come in, what goes into paying back the dollars we got from the state to fund the project, substantiating the 102% reserve, paying for the operational expenses of the agency, and then on a quarterly basis, those dollars get swept into the state's school foundation fund. So in that capacity, this is a public goods project for the state. What's going to be very interesting for us is we need to put the token treatment rules into place, because that's a nut that hasn't really been cracked by anybody yet, where we need to put actual rules on the books in the state of Wyoming about how stable tokens will be issued, redeemed, burnt, potentially interdicted, which will have to go through a robust process, including subpoenas and warrants. We shouldn't be able to unilaterally zap anyone's tokens from orbit. In my personal opinion, that's coming pretty close to some Fourth Amendment concerns. So I think there's some confidence we can give the end user there. And again, just doubling down on privacy. Wyoming already has a rule in the books that preserves the privacy of your private keys. You cannot be compelled to give up your private keys in any civil or criminal proceeding, or the state. We can't compel speech. So there's a lot of considerations like that that I think will speak to both the long-term crypto community as well as people who are interested in the space or curious about the space, but tentative to get into it because they hear about scams or hacks. Well, now the state's doing it. And also they're concerned about privacy. They're concerned about CBDCs. And I think if we come out the door swinging with something that looks very different than what a CBDC could possibly be, we'll be in pretty good shape.
What about when you look at interest rates right now on the federal funds chart? If you look at it, we've come down here really since last fall, and it started to continue to fall down, and it looks like we might be on a trend downward on the federal funds rate. Now, with that being said, that of course affects how interest is paid. Are you too late if interest rate continues to fall and we start to see less and less yield-bearing opportunities out there?
So I'm not concerned at this point in time. I think we've got enough wiggle room and time before interest rates materially decrease, before we'll have a chance to get our reserves put in place and to get into the market and permeate from there before we see any kind of drastic drops to around 2% or below. Obviously, mathematically, your viewers are wise. They can do the math. If we drop below a 2% interest rate and we're supposed to maintain a 2% reserve, that's going to make things mechanically difficult for us. So one of the things that we could talk about now is we don't expect to really be including fees into this program with issuance. We want this to be fairly fee-free. I think it would be self-defeatist if we start putting fees into it and then pontificating about how we're trying to make those payment rails easier or cheaper. I'd also add that that's one of the reasons why I think over time, perhaps the remit of this agency expands to things like RWAs, where fees would be a bit more accommodating, and that's where you could make up the bulk of the program. But for the immediate future, I'm not too concerned about that. I think we've got time to scale the product, build the reserves, and do so in a way that's, again, sending funds to the school fund in the state. This is not a shareholder or VC-backed program where we need to maximize the market share every second of every day. We can grow this thing naturally. and we don't need to worry about maximizing returns at the expense of the user or the program in general.
Yeah. I want to, talk about the potential of slowing you down, because you look at, and I'll just ask you this point blank, do you feel like some chains are throwing out enough roadblocks here that are slowing the process down overall? And can you get past those, being a state that has to kind of somewhat make it an even playing field? And we've heard your statements on these in the past. What's your opinion of that? And I guess with the legislators, are they behind you, in terms of your decisions?
We're not slowing down for anybody. You've highlighted before, and even in this conversation, there's value to being first to market. There's already a number of issuers that are out there. You've asked a question, is it too late? I don't think it's too late, but we do need to move quickly, and we continue to do so. And I think this is the third time I'll say it, but this is why we leaned heavily into vendors or open source blockchains, permissionless blockchains that have existing and demonstrable infrastructure. In terms of the legislature, it's not a secret that someone who is a founder of a blockchain did put forth a $6 million PAC with the explicit remit of working to change the procurement process in the state of Wyoming, and made some specific digs at the agency and myself. I maintain that we've run a transparent and public process. As you've pulled up before, all of our determinations were made in the public forum and are still there for viewing by anyone who wishes to check the website. And I will add, we did have a third reading of the supplemental budget recently in the legislature, where despite the fact that the Stable Token Commission did not have any supplemental budget asks, nor did we have any legislation, there was a third reading amendment on the budget in the Senate that would functionally defund the Stable Token Commission, should that have gotten forward.
Wow.
That is something that did not even receive a floor vote. It was put forward as an amendment, and it was withdrawn. And I think that sent a pretty strong message that the Wyoming state legislature is not for sale. It was rebuked about as strongly as it could be rebuked.
Man. That's crazy that that's going on in state capitals around the United States. So kudos to you guys. I want to play a clip. This is your governor, and he's talking about how you guys are going to take the profits and what they're going to go into in terms of proceeds. Take a look.
If we are successful, there is adoption, and we do make profits, where do those flow?
So those will flow to our school system. This is another way to help fund our schools.
So it's for the kids, folks.
Yeah. The temptation to say, what are the profits we can make off of this, is something I really think we got to resist.
And you look at blockchain, you also look at the potential of putting kind of the Doge style of transparency on states, and even now with Elon, what he's trying to do with Doge at the federal government level. Is it possible that we could see a blockchain-oriented real-time tracking of how these funds are being utilized in Wyoming in the future?
So from my perspective, and I'm not going to speak for any other directors or any other agencies, but when it comes to transparency of how dollars are moving around, blockchain is best. And when, as a public citizen myself, I believe there should be thorough transparency in where government spending is going. I think we're seeing the manifestation of that with Doge. And I think with everything going on and how public that has been, we'll see cries for more of this to be public. I think in Wyoming, we do a better job than most from where we are already, even without a blockchain solution. The state auditor's office does run a program called WYOpen, W-Y Open, and that essentially on a year-to-year basis tracks where every dollar of spending in the government goes. But that is a fairly robust process. It takes a lot of time to put that together. With a blockchain, it's possible you can have wallets for all of the folks receiving funding from the state government, hit a button, have your audit done. And I think that's the level of efficiency that we're heading towards. I think people aren't aware of what this tech can do. Again, they're still caught up in the media cycles of hearing about scams and hacks and all of that. Yeah. And to the detriment of understanding the efficiency of this technology at its kind of base level.
Well, I think the good thing is that you're already on your way, which I think a lot of states just are not this far along, obviously, even though there has been some, a little bit of saber rattling I've heard in Texas, even to Florida to a certain extent. So kudos to what you guys are doing. I want to kind of get your opinion on this last topic right here. This is one of Casper, Wyoming's business guys, and he's a Republican there, Reed Rasner. He made a bid on TikTok. So we've talked about TikTok here on the show quite a bit because we think eventually this could be the one social media platform that will have a blockchain backend. What is the, is there anything here, and have you guys heard anything around this, or is this just happening that Wyoming seems to be a hotbed for people understanding blockchain? What's going on? What are you guys putting in the water there?
No comment on what's in the water other than the cowboy pioneer spirit. I've heard some of that. I think from the state of Wyoming's perspective, I revert back to the fact that privacy is tantamount for us. And when we have concerns about where data is going for social media platforms that are used as much as TikTok and the algorithms that factor into what people are seeing, I think there is a lot of interest in making sure we have some say over that rather than overseas interests. I do think Elon, with his acquisition of Twitter, has proven that you could turn these social media platforms into the public forum. And I think perhaps people think that you can do the same with TikTok as well. As one step further that I'll say, and it's not exactly the question you asked me, but in terms of incorporating blockchain payment rails into either of those systems, I would be all for it. Elon, obviously, with his experience at PayPal, has been a payments guy for a long time, has talked about turning X into a payments platform. For those who don't remember, I think back in maybe 2017, 2018, X did have the ability to turn your profile picture into from an NFT that could be integrated, right? So, that infrastructure is probably there somewhere. And I think there's a pretty big potential to turn into not only your payments rail, and I think Warpcast has done a great job of showing what that could look like already. I think there's a great opportunity for real-time creator attribution. I'm not going to go into the whole story here, but before I was working for a state government, I worked on a platform called Rensa that was doing digital multimedia attribution and real-time payouts to content creators. And I think that's where a number of these systems can go, whether that's X, whether that's TikTok, or even some of these AI systems that people are calling for them to have a better attribution to the creators of the data sets that they're using. And perhaps I've been in this industry so long that I'm a hammer and all I see are nails, but it does seem like a great way to solve some of these issues that we're seeing.
Yeah, well, we're seeing more of it. The good thing is that I think finally we've got legislators around the country, states trying to, initiate things like reserves on digital assets. Now you've got Doge, of course, administering. Now we have a blockchain, a crypto/AI czar for working with the president directly with David Sachs. So a lot of things have changed in 3 or 4 years, Anthony. So you're in the right place at the right time, for sure. Hey, listen, it's been great having you on the show today. Thank you so much for coming in. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Paul.
All right, if you guys are not tied into the Diamond Circle, this, of course, is a great place to get our email that we send out to you guys. But if you want to go real time, you can join our Telegram group, and there's a link right below that. I'm in there every day. I'm chatting with you guys, and I love the conversations that we're having over there. So make sure and join if you're not in that. And of course, follow me out there on X @Paul Barron. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.